In 1945, Japan was devastated, cities leveled, the economy collapsed, factories in ruins. Experts said recovery would take at least 50 years. What actually happened? Within 30 years, Japan became the second largest economy on Earth, not through a revolutionary breakthrough, and not by working 10 times harder, but through a method so simple it almost sounds insulting: change 1% every day. They called it Kaizen. Kaizen didn't just rebuild Japan's economy. It also explains why 95% of self-improvement routines fail within 30 days, and why the few that survive can last a lifetime. Here's what nobody tells you: your routine isn't failing because you lack discipline. It's failing because you built it wrong from the start. The harder you try, the faster it collapses. And the solution is completely counterintuitive. Now, let's go back to a factory floor in post-war Japan, where a struggling engineer accidentally discovered the only system that actually works. Chapter 1: The Problem with How You Build Routines. In 1948, Taiki Ono was staring at a disaster. At Toyota's factory in Nagoya, the assembly line kept breaking down. Workers were exhausted. Quality was terrible. American car companies were producing vehicles 10 times faster. His manager gave him 1 month to fix it, or the factory would close. Ono's first instinct, just like yours when you start a new routine, was to go big, redesign the entire system, overhaul every process, and make dramatic changes that would produce dramatic results. He tried it. 2 weeks of massive restructuring. Workers pushed to their limits. New systems implemented overnight. The factory got worse. He sat alone on the factory floor at 2 a.m., surrounded by broken machinery and frustrated workers, and asked himself a question that changed everything. Why does fixing problems create more problems? The answer hit him slowly. He was treating symptoms, not causes. Every big change he made disrupted something that was already working and created new problems faster than it solved old ones. The system was too complex for revolutionary change. It needed something else. He noticed one worker, an older man named Kenji, quietly adjusting a single bolt on his machine. Just one bolt. After that adjustment, his section ran 3% smoother. No drama. No overhaul. Just one small, precise change. Ono watched Kenji for 3 days. Every morning, one tiny adjustment, one small fix, one minor improvement. After 1 week, Kenji's section was running 20% better. After 1 month, 80% better. No big changes, just 1% improvements, compounding daily. Ono realized he'd been thinking about change backward. Most people build routines like this, and see if this sounds familiar. On Monday, you decide to transform your life, wake up at 5 a.m., go to the gym for 90 minutes, meditate for 30 minutes, read for an hour, journal, take a cold shower, and meal prep healthy food. By Wednesday, you're exhausted. By Friday, it's abandoned. By Sunday, you're planning the next Monday transformation. Sound familiar? Here's the brutal truth: that approach doesn't fail because you're weak. It fails because of how your brain is wired. Large behavioral changes trigger the brain's threat response, the same system that activates during physical danger. Your brain experiences a dramatic new routine the way it experiences a predator: fight, freeze, or flee. And most of the time, you flee back to your old routine. But here's what Ono discovered, and what changed Japan forever: small changes don't trigger the threat response. They slip past your brain's defense system undetected. And once they are in, they compound. That's the first thing you need to understand about Kaizen. But there's a second part most people miss, and it's the part that determines whether your routine survives past day 30. Chapter 2: The Principle of Shoshin, Beginner's Mind. 6 months into his Kaizen experiment, Ono hit a wall. The small improvements were working. Quality was up 40%. But progress had stalled. Workers were implementing the same types of improvements on repeat. The system had gotten better, and then stopped getting better. Desperate, Ono brought in a consultant, an old Buddhist monk named Matsumoto, who had spent 30 years studying organizational behavior. It was an unusual choice for a factory problem, but Ono needed answers. Matsumoto walked the factory floor once, slowly, saying nothing. Then he sat down with Ono and said 6 words. "Your workers have stopped seeing clearly." Ono didn't understand. Matsumoto explained, when people become experienced, they stop seeing what's actually there. They see what they expect to see. They've lost Shoshin, the beginner's mind. A beginner sees a machine and asks, "Why does this work this way?" An expert sees the same machine and assumes, "This is how it must work." Matsumoto told Ono to hire 10 complete beginners with 0 factory experience. Put them on the most complex sections. Have them ask questions all day. Write down everything that confused them. Ono thought it was insane. He did it anyway. In the first week, those 10 beginners identified 47 processes that experienced workers had accepted as just how things are done, processes that were completely unnecessary. Decades of accumulated assumption that nobody questioned, simply because everyone was too experienced to notice. Removing those 47 processes improved efficiency by another 30% in 2 months. This is Shoshin, and it's also the hidden destroyer of self-improvement routines. Think about it, when you start a new routine, you're a beginner. Everything feels intentional. You notice every part of the process. That beginner awareness is your greatest asset. But as the routine becomes habitual, if it survives that long, you stop seeing it. You go through the motions. The routine becomes automatic, but also invisible. And invisible routines stop evolving. They calcify. They become the 47 unnecessary processes in your life, things you do because you've always done them, not because they are still serving you. That's why your routine doesn't need to be regularly overhauled. It needs to be regularly examined, with fresh eyes. There's a critical difference. Kaizen doesn't mean changing things for the sake of change. It means maintaining the beginner's eye, the one that notices what's working, what's not, and what tiny adjustment could unlock the next level. Here's the practice. Once a week, look at your routine as if you're seeing it for the first time. Ask, if I were designing this from scratch today, would I include this? Some things survive that question. Others reveal themselves as habits you're maintaining out of momentum, not purpose. But understanding Shoshin brings up an even harder problem, one that defeats almost everyone who tries to build lasting routines. It has nothing to do with your routine itself. It has everything to do with what happens when life disrupts it. Chapter 3, The Principle of Kaizen no Katachi. The Shape of Improvement. December 1950, the Korean War erupts. Toyota loses half its workforce overnight to military conscription. Every production target collapses. The Ono system, painstakingly built over 2 years, faces complete destruction. Most leaders would have suspended the improvement process during the crisis, just survive first, improve later. Ono did the opposite. He gathered his remaining workers, half the team, double the pressure, and said, "This is exactly when Kaizen matters most. Not because we can improve our way out of this crisis, but because the shape of our response to this crisis will determine who we are when the crisis ends." He introduced the third principle, Kaizen no Katachi, the shape of improvement, the idea that what matters isn't just the improvement itself, but the consistent shape of how you respond to setbacks. Here's what he meant: every system, every routine, every person experiences disruption. The question isn't whether your routine will be interrupted. It will be. The question is what shape your response takes when it is. He identified 3 shapes of response. 1. The collapse shape. Disruption hits routine, abandon, guilt, motivation rebuilds, a new routine starts from scratch, next disruption, collapse again. This cycle keeps most people trapped. 2. The rigid shape. Disruption hits, you force the routine to continue unchanged, exhaustion, resentment, the routine becomes a burden, eventual abandonment. This is what discipline culture teaches. It works, until it doesn't. Then it breaks completely. 3. The Kaizen shape. Disruption hits, routine scales down to a minimum viable version, the minimum is maintained through disruption, the full routine is restored when the disruption passes, the system becomes stronger for having survived. The minimum viable version is the key. Ono called it the 1-minute rule. Whatever your routine is, no matter how elaborate, there must be a version of it you can do in 1 minute. Not a good version. Not a productive version. Just a version that maintains the identity of being someone who does this practice. Why does this matter so much? Because identity is the foundation of any lasting routine. Research from the British Journal of Health Psychology shows that people who maintained the smallest possible version of a behavior during disruption were 3 times more likely to return to the full behavior after the disruption passed, compared to people who abandoned it entirely. The brain reads, "I still did something," as continuity, and "I did nothing," as termination. Think about your own failed routines. Did they die because you had a bad week and did nothing? Or did they survive bad weeks because you had a minimum version to fall back on? Here's what Kaizen no Katachi looks like in practice. Your routine has 3 versions. Full version, what you do on ideal days. Half version, what you do on hard days. Minimum version, what you do on survival days. The survival version is non-negotiable. It happens even when everything else falls apart, because the survival version isn't about results. It's about maintaining the identity thread that connects who you are today to who you're becoming. Toyota survived the Korean War disruption not just intact, but stronger, because maintaining Kaizen through the crisis made the principles bone deep in every worker. Not theory. Not aspiration. Identity. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting, because there's a 4th principle that many Western interpretations of Kaizen leave out, and it might be the most important one. Chapter 4, The Principle of Hansei. Reflection without shame. 1953, Toyota has survived the war, rebuilt the team, and doubled production. By every external measure, Ono's Kaizen system is a success. But Ono is privately worried. He's watching a pattern he can't explain. Workers who succeed with Kaizen often plateau after 12 to 18 months. Small improvements continue, but the rate slows dramatically. Something about sustained success seems to dull the improvement instinct. He consults again with Matsumoto, now in his 80s. The old monk listens, nods slowly, and says, "They've learned to improve, but they haven't learned to reflect." Matsumoto introduces Hansei, a concept with no direct English translation. It means something between reflection, acknowledgement, and self-examination, but critically, it's reflection without shame or self-punishment. That distinction matters enormously. Much of Western self-improvement culture uses failure as a motivational weapon. You failed. That means you need to work harder. Failure creates shame. Shame creates motivation. Motivation creates action. In the short term, this can work. In the long term, it builds a self-improvement system on self-punishment, and people eventually stop examining their failures to protect themselves from the pain. Hansei is different. You examine what didn't work with the same emotional neutrality you'd use to examine why a machine ran 3% slower today. Not, "I failed. I'm weak. But, this didn't work. What actually happened? What does that tell me about what to try differently?" Neutral, curious, non-judgmental. Ono implemented weekly Han sessions, 20 minutes every Friday, with 3 questions only. What did I try this week that didn't work the way I expected? What does that tell me about the actual system, not about myself? What one tiny adjustment might work differently next week? Notice what's absent: judgment, self-criticism, and motivation speeches. Just observation, analysis, and adjustment. The effect was dramatic. Workers who'd plateaued for months suddenly started improving again, not because they worked harder, but because they finally understood why specific things weren't working, without their ego getting in the way of seeing clearly. For your self-improvement routine, Han changes everything. Every failed routine contains data. Every time you skipped your practice, every time you fell back into old habits, every time the routine collapsed, that isn't evidence of weakness. It's information about what your routine was missing. The reason you skipped the gym wasn't lack of willpower. Maybe the gym is 20 minutes away and your available window was 25 minutes. That's a design problem, not a character problem. The reason you abandoned meditation wasn't that you can't sit still. Maybe you were doing 20 minutes when 5 minutes would have been sustainable. That's a calibration problem. Han finds it. Here's your weekly Han practice, every Sunday, 15 minutes. Write 3 things that didn't happen the way you intended in your routine that week. For each one, ask, what does this tell me about the design of my routine? Not about me. Then make one small adjustment for next week, not 10 adjustments. 1 Kaizen step. 1% improvement. These principles create something that looks nothing like the transformation routines you've tried before, and that's exactly the point. Chapter 5, The Complete Kaizen Routine System. By 1970, Toyota had become a model for manufacturing excellence worldwide. American car companies sent teams to study what Japan had done. They expected to find advanced technology, revolutionary processes, secret formulas. What they found confused them: small notebooks everywhere. Every worker carried a small notebook, recording tiny observations, tiny improvements, tiny adjustments. One American executive reportedly said, "That's it. That's the secret, notebooks." A Toyota manager replied, "The notebook is not the secret. The daily practice of noticing is the secret. You can copy the notebook. You cannot copy 25 years of daily noticing." This is the complete Kaizen routine system, and it has 4 components, each mapped to the principles we've discussed. Component 1, the minimum viable routine, Kaizen no Kichi. Define your routine in 3 versions. Write them down right now, or after this. Full version, every element, ideal conditions, full time. This is what you do when life cooperates. Half version, core elements only, 50% time. This is your default on challenging days. Minimum version, 1 minute. One single action that preserves the identity. This is what you do when everything is falling apart. The minimum version is the insurance policy for your routine survival. Component 2, the 1% improvement protocol, Kaizen core. Your routine is never finished. It's always in 1% improvement mode. Every week, identify one element that could be marginally better, not redesigned, marginally better. Maybe the timing shifts 15 minutes. Maybe one exercise replaces another. Maybe the sequence changes. 1% weekly, compounding. Component 3, the beginner's eye review, Shoshin, once a month. Not weekly. That's too much. Look at your entire routine as a stranger. Ask, if I were starting this today, which elements would I keep? Anything you can't justify keeping gets removed or questioned. Most routines survive this. Some don't. Both outcomes are correct. Component 4, weekly Han. Every Sunday, 15 minutes, 3 questions. What didn't work? What does that tell me about the design? What one adjustment will I make next week? No self-judgment, no motivation speeches, just a mechanic examining an engine. This system doesn't create the dramatic transformation you feel on Monday morning when you commit to changing your life. That feeling is dopamine. It's real, but it doesn't last. What this system creates is different, a quiet, almost invisible momentum. Small improvements that compound. An identity built through consistency rather than intensity. A routine that evolves with your life instead of breaking when life changes. Toyota went from ruins in 1945 to one of the world's most valuable car companies, not through revolutionary change, but through 1% improvement every day for decades. Japan went from economic collapse to the world's second-largest economy using the same method Taiki Ono applied to a single assembly line. And those 10 beginners with 0 experience. They found 47 unnecessary processes that decades of experts had stopped seeing, because they'd lost the beginner's eye. Your self-improvement routine has been failing for a reason, not because you lack discipline, but because you've been building for transformation when you should be building for compounding. Because you've been aiming for revolutionary change when 1% was always enough. The complete Kaizen system, one more time. Define your minimum viable routine. Improve 1% weekly. Review monthly with beginner's eyes. Reflect without shame every Sunday. That's the entire system, simple enough to remember, consistent enough to compound. If this changed how you think about building routines, I want to know one routine you're going to build using Kaizen. What's your minimum viable version? Write it out. Make it public. Start with 1 minute if that's all you have. Remember what Ono wrote in his notebook at age 70, after 40 years of Kaizen. I have not become great. I have become slightly better than yesterday, every day, for 40 years. The difference between those two paths is everything. Start slightly better. Start today.